Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our market overview here. Uh, Everything you see on here is, not financial advice. It's just a simple overview of the market. Hopefully, you can learn something along the way. And let's get started. First and foremost, my first thing I like to look at is to see kind of how our weekly candle came out here. Um, it's it's a long body candle with smaller wicks. What's interesting here is that it did engulf the previous week's candle, which leans a little bit more bearish than it does bullish. Um, Especially with the engulfing causing a change in character. So our candle is now red as opposed to it being green. Uh, so it's just worth mentioning there. As far as our daily candle here, um, nothing super significant. We did open up on a gap down when we started Friday. We made attempts to refill that, but of course that didn't come through all the way there. We weren't able to really recapture the lows here and aim to push up any higher or try to recover out of the gap that we had. One thing that I wanted to point out was our little channel here that we had identified last week playing out. We had a bounce off of the channel um, this week, but we did close underneath our week pivotal point, um, which was previously 584.45. We noticed the pivotal points have changed, and as well as our high and low expectations for the week. Our high is somewhere around 592, and our lows are somewhere around 569. Um, Again, price doesn't necessarily have to go here. This is just giving us a little uh, I guess a way to see where we can range in the week, right? This is called an a straddle technique, option straddle technique. I will be glad to go over that with anybody individually at a later point, but this is essentially how I get my highs and lows for the week. So, one thing I wanted to point out is our head and shoulders that we identified last week, which was our head, our shoulder, and our other shoulder right here. It still has not been invalidated um, because, yes, we have a sloping support here, but one thing we wanted to notice is our neckline is our 585 point. So we are underneath that neckline. I would look for any break of this sloping support that we have for any possible downside. So I just wanted to point out that the head and shoulders is still there. Um, we don't necessarily have to play it out, but it is still in play. One thing I also wanted to point out was last week we had identified two possible bearish outcomes that could have happened in the market. Um, One of which was, a chop in between our pivotal point here, consolidation straight out, right? This is our neutral, not bearish and not bullish, but and not inherently bearish either, right? But we also identified a pathing that looked something like this, where we had a break, retest of our pivotal point, some bounces on our resistances, break under our pivotal point, bounce off our sloping support before any continued downside. Um, and essentially, what we had this week was that. So we opened with a gap up. Soon after, we had a correction. So what we did was by Wednesday, even though it was a shorter week, by Wednesday, we basically opened back in our Friday's range right here. Um, oop, oop. We opened back into our Friday's range here, and retested that pattern that we were assuming would play out here. So this gap up was their whole Nvidia, everyone, all the hype over Nvidia, right? So that's why we had the huge push up. I said last week as well that tech was leading the market. So it was just interesting to see that when we did have our retest of our strong pivotal point, we had a strong pullback, a bounce towards our previous pivotal point, before retesting our channel, and that's what we kind of sitting at now, right? So for the pathing for this week, it's gonna look a little bit differently. Uh, let's drop it down a little bit, maybe the hourly or the 4 hour. Let's do hourly. So for pathing this week, what I'm looking at is, so we had our gap up here and a correction that took place, right? So this was our Fridays. Yes, go ahead. It might be me because I'm sharing the audio, but I don't think so. How about now? Is the echo still there? Okay. No, no, that's fine. Okay, not a problem. Not a problem. Yeah, and on top of that, I'm looking left and right, and then it just gets louder in here. Right. So, anyways, so oh, I appreciate that. I got you. Okay, so we had our gap up here and correction that took place, right? This candle right here is our Friday's close, right? And right around here is where we opened up on Wednesday. So we're back in this range that we were originally, post the Nvidia hype, right? This was just the and well, NVDA, right? Sorry about the terrible chicken scratch, right? That's our Nvidia hype here. So once we had that correction take place, this is really where we wanted to see the our retest of our pivots and our lower end of our range, to see if there was any bounce or any continuation that would lead us to go to the upside or even towards the downside, right? Uh, so as far as pathing goes, I'm leaning much more bearish, outcomes wise. We really need to close over the strong pivotal point, which is around 590.75, for me to see any price action that would potentially look towards the upside, right? Uh, as far as for our downside, this is what I see playing out a little bit more, and sort of looks like uh, a bounce towards our weak pivotal point. As you can see, we wick below it, but then we closed right above this pivotal point here. Um, I once again, all these levels I'll post at the end of the live, so that way you can get those levels, right? So as far as pathing wise, I see us having a bounce off of here before having some rejection, and um retesting our supports here right underneath the gap, right? So this is our last line of defense, which is our gap here. We might see a little bit of a bounce, more of a recovery bounce than anything else before any further downside, because there's little structure here stopping price from going straight on the downside, right? One thing as well that I noticed is on the daily we had our previous sloping resistance here, which we're no longer able to retest that level, right? So I did notice that we are creating another sloping resistance here. So if we do have some upside here, right? So more bearish outcome would be a retest of our previous pivot here, maybe some bounces and then a failure. But ideally, what I think could be more possible would be a break out of this range of our previous candles range, retest of our pivot here, and see if we can claim the strong pivot at 590 before having another rejection and then continue downside. This seems um I would say more stronger leaning bearish than if we had just started to go down right away, because then this would help validate our sloping resistance. But once again, the market doesn't always give you what you want. So it's just really good to just look at our levels and see how price reacts to it, right? So as my lovely friend here, Joyrider, always says, is breakout, retest, confirm, right? So you always want to see us break out of a range, retest this before we can confirm that it's choosing that direction, right? Um, BRC. You're gonna patent it pretty soon. Okay. Um, but yeah, so as far as the with the pathing, right, so we had more of a we wanted to see a stronger rejection on this sloping support here. What could what could be taking place when we get to that point is we could have uh, a head and shoulders pattern that may play out right before continued downside. So our retest of our strong pivotal point here and having some type of rejection could lead us to another micro head and shoulders pattern that's playing out, which would be more ideal, which is why I said this would be more of a, I guess, better pattern to play out. Because then you can really look for our 584 rejection again for any continued downside. Because going short at the open is not guaranteed, right? Yes, we have a nice move that could happen on the downside, but as we see last Friday, the market didn't give us that fill that we all assumed would happen, right? There was still a little bit of room left, and we even had a body closing above our sloping support here. So it's just really important here to look for our patterns, looking for our level retests before we can make any assumptions on any direction that the market wants to go, right? So let's move on to our QQQ. Weekly candle, similar to SPY. Nothing super, you know, major that I could say about it. Yeah, like I said, we're having an engulfing that's occurring with a change of character. Um, but unlike SPY, what we are seeing on QQQ could potentially just be a pullback off of our bull trend that we were on, right? So we had this huge bull trend playing out here. Notice I did not put my fib here towards the bottom end of this range, because when we did have our push up, we had a correction here. This is around the 38 50% mark before we had the continuous bounce. But from here on is really where we had our continuation down. Even this red candle did not fill the body of our previous week's bull candle, right? So we're still continuing in this channel. Yes, we broke out of this channel. Um, Not this video, but I believe the video before that. Um, Not last week's video, but the video before that, we were speaking of the channel. So yes, we did break out of the channel this week. But notice how we are testing the 50% fib here on the weekly, um, our weekly structure here. So I would say that we're possibly just having somewhat of a pullback. Here's our pullback channel here. Um, so I'd like to see if we can maybe pull back, retest around the bottom end of this channel and see if we can break out of it for any continued upside, right? So of course everything's looking, somewhat bearish, like I said on SPY, but QQQ still has some glimmer of hope still there. Let's go to our daily channel here. All right, so for our daily chart here, last week we identified that there was a wedging that was occurring on QQQ. With us opening Monday above out of that channel, we obviously this channel, this sloping resistance here breaking out of the wedge was inherently bullish. But as you see, the next day when we tried to retest this channel here for any continuation on the upside, we failed to continue. This level here was 520.54, which is what we were identifying last week as an area where we want price to hold over for any strong continuations, right? For us to lead more bullish than bearish. And unfortunately, we did not do that, right? We even closed below our previous week pivotal point here, which was 516. Our pivotal points have changed, like I mentioned before, so be on the lookout for that. Um, as far as pathing goes, like we said, we wanted to break out of the channel, but we did not have any retest of the channel, and it just led to further downside. So for pathing this week, um, I want to see us one retest this 510 level, right? Because previous what we mentioned before was breaking under this 510 level. Um, if you look further back on the chart, you'll see this was a resistance at some point. Multiple touches, not just here, but even further out. Um, so 510 was our pretty much our do or die level last week, and we obviously closed much below it, right? So what I would like to see, if we do have anything bullish that happens here, would be either a strong push back in to test that 510 level, um, break out, retest it before breaking out, and maybe trying to recapture the channel that we had for any upside. And once again, closing over our strong pivotal point is inherently bullish. So I would like to see us make attempts to close over 516.67 once again, um, for our bearish outcomes here. For our bearish outcomes, what we can see is um, a retest of our 510 level being a resistance, as it acted as support, acted as a support, um, and it rejected on a lower time frame. You'll see that it rejected slightly, but we did close above it. But what I would like to see is us retesting that 510 level, retesting our supports here, maybe possibly having a bounce near a weak pivotal point here, because with our weak pivotal points, closing underneath this in the week is inherently bearish, right? So price may not do this right away. It'll take some time for this to play out. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it could happen any day, or it can happen tomorrow, right? So this whole path thing can just happen tomorrow. But we're looking at it more on the weekly time frame, right? So a retest of our 510 level here, um, trying to find support at their weak pivotal point, before a small bounce taking place and then continue downside, right? And then we do have this channel here that I identified before, as our just small pullback off the bull trend that we're on. So long as we do break underneath our weak pivotal point, but we do not close underneath our channel here, QQQ still remains inherently bullish than bearish. It's just it seems to be more of a pullback than anything else. All right, and let's go to our IWM here. Trying to go through them real quick, and then I have a little, I guess you can say, lesson here to talk about a little bit later as far as the news that we had this previous week. So with IWM, we obviously had a bear flag that we identified last week with um with our 525 526 level being our break for any positive momentum upwards. As you can see, we had multiple rejections here, which was sort of one of our pathings last week, which was a rejection here, a retest of our channel, and then continued downside. Unfortunately, from Tuesday to Wednesday, we opened on a gap down. So we couldn't really see the retest of our channel actually taking place. But closing underneath our channel was inherently bearish. So just looking for any breaks under our support was ideally the play. Um, for the last 2 days of the trading week, with Thursday being a day that we had off, right? So for pathing wise, for IWM here, what I see as far as bullish, even the bullish aspects aren't crazy inherently bullish. So I do see we had, oh, let's remove that. So our bottom end of our range here, where we had multiple wicks pushing upwards, right? This low volume range, because our bodies did not really fill this range here, right? So this is the bottom of our value range, right? With the top being our actual value range. So what I would like to see as far as bullish would be a retest of this range here. Maybe a structure playing out, so we can either have a cup playing out here, a cup playing out here for the downside, or an inverse cup playing out for the upside. But more than likely, I see us having a break above, trying to create some structure here before we actually fall downwards, right? So even any bullish outcomes, I would still remain bearish if we're not able to close over 223 or even 224, our strong pivotal point, right? So any breakouts over this and then over this would be inherently bullish. This does not seem like the pathing that may possibly play out, but again, I could be wrong. But I would just look for any rejections at 223 if we do have some outside momentum, right? We can have a double top playing out, a cup and handle, some pattern forming here, right? Because we're finally out of this range that we were in for so long. So retesting the bottom end of that range gives us an indication that price is having rejection at such a higher volume range. As far as bearish pathing goes, one, we can have a break right underneath the weak pivotal point and just continue downwards, right? With our supports being enough away that you could see some reward on the downside, right? Besides that, what we could have is more of, you notice we had a bounce here off the 215 level here. What would be more ideal would be a retest of this 515 level with a rejection at our weak pivotal point before any continued downside. So I would like to see strong rejections at this 516. I believe it's 517. I'll post all the levels at the end of the day. Rejection here at 517 would be much more stronger of a indicator for us being bearish, right? I appreciate it. Thank you guys. Thank you. And then as far as our internals, I'm not gonna talk too much about all of them. Once again, I'll just be pointing out some of the ones that are significant to me. One thing I noticed here is our high yield bond was having a huge initially having a bear flag playing out, and this turned into a channel which we identified last week, turning into more of a upwards channel. Obviously, towards the end of the week, we closed underneath it, breaking out of this channel. But one thing I wanted to mention was us having this channel was inherently more risk on, right? Which means that tech was leading the market, right? It's going to be leading the market. And that's what we can see last week, right? With our Nvidia having our pumps. It gave us a little boost that we needed. But coming out of this channel, especially with, our semiconductors falling off right after our CES meeting, a break of the channel was, almost imminent to happen. Especially if the with all the hype on Nvidia, there typically has a huge pullback, which is again something we mentioned last week. I would just look for us to remain in this channel. Maybe we have a bounce off of this channel here, uh, our downwards channel, and just consolidate in the range, right? Um, just wanted to point out that we did break out of the channel, so our tech leading market is kind of halted. So that's just something I wanted to mention as far as that. Um, all right, SMH, where are we? All right, SMH. Again, we were talking about this sloping resistance that was taking place here for so long. Um, and one thing I did mention was if we can close over 250 here on our SMH, it's inherently extremely bullish for Nvidia, right? We broke out of this range and created a new high in what is this, our last quarter range of all of Q4. We just created a new high in that, in our value range of Q4. And what happened when we achieved the 263? Nvidia had a huge new high breakout, right? Not a new all-time high, but it did have a huge breakout of our range. I think it closed at like 150 or something like that. So remember, anything over 250 is extremely bullish for our semiconductors. And we do want to bear in mind that we did test our support at 245. So we want to just make sure that we're holding over 245, um, because anything under 245 can be a little bit more bearish than bullish for our semis. And we're just going to really be looking for buyers and investors to step up in the market to bring the tech right back up, right? Uh, And then let's talk about. Wanted to talk about XLE, but let's save that one for last because I have a. That's where our little lesson comes in. All right. So for our consumer defensives, um, this is really what we were looking at with news wise last week. This week past, we were talking about how the news may have more of an effect on the market here. Um, of course, everything was leaning more bearish with all our news, um, but just wanted to point out we're in a demand zone here, and we have a strong support at 218. So we do want to make sure that we're holding above our 218 level and seeing if we can have a support out of our demand zone here. Um, this is really good for our Amazons, our Teslas, and so on and so forth. And towards the end, I'll talk about how this kind of gave us a little bit more confidence that Tesla was not going to have the huge fall off that it did. That, you know, we were worried about happening, right? We did have somewhat of a recovery last closing at the end of the week. So if you want to see any further downtrend on those kind of stocks like Amazon, Tesla, all of our consumer discretionaries, do you want to see us starting to fail in this demand zone, especially a failure at 218? Uh, our XLV still holding channel. Nothing has changed. We literally identified this channel somewhat in November and it has not changed. It has bounced off, retested, bounced again, and I am looking to see if this retest will be a clean breakout of it. So just wanted to point that out. We did have a resistance at 140.68. So I want to see if price can try to capture this level and retest our channel for any breakout because our health sector is taking a beating at the moment. So I just would like to see us at least recover out of the channel before any real direction gets established, right? Obviously, the direction is downwards, but if we break out of the channel, reject at 245 and continue down, that's fine. But we just have this channel that's playing out for a really long time now, and I really want to see us break out of that channel. All right, so our XLP here, it just took a huge nosedive. This was also something that we were looking at with the news this past week, and it's just inherently bearish, right? So we broke underneath our 78.87 level or 77 support. We're breaking under these supports, which is concerning because normally when we see a pullback in the broader market, our SPYs or QQQ, you know, people can rely on the consumer staples. Those are your Costco, your Coca-Cola, and all these other stocks. Typically, they thrive when the market isn't doing well, right? Because those are essentials. Um, and what we see here is the market is having a huge pullback here, and our, I guess, saving grace, our dividend stocks, are where we pump all our money into and just let right out for 5, 10, 15 years, is still going down. So we're having a loss of confidence in risk on sectors as in tech, and then there's little to no strength in our consumer staples, which is our defensives, where people will at least put their money in. Yeah, Campbell soup. My Campbell soup is getting hammered. Um, but yeah, so all of these essentials, typically people put their money into it during times of worry, and we're just seeing a broad market pullback here. Everything's just having a pullback. So just wanted to point that out here. It's very interesting to see that even our defenses are taking a hit at the moment, as well as all of our spy sectors are having a beat here, right? Except our XLE, which is our last thing we're going to talk about, right? It has an upward channel happening here. So this is our energy sector, and this is where our little lesson comes in. So our energy sector is having um, a recovery here out of a huge downtrend. Yes, it could be a bear flag paying out, but one thing that I wanted to mention is something called stagflation. Has anybody heard this term or know what it is or anything like that? Um, just curious. It's a little different than inflation, so just wanted to see if anyone knows what that is. So with stagflation occurs when we have our energy sectors growing, our economy is not growing as fast, and we're still having high unemployment rates, right? Um, it's slightly different than inflation. So ignore my chicken scratch here, but I'm going to try my best to explain it, right? So we're just going to have F for factories or industries and P for people. Right. So factories will push out, let's say this square is paper, right? People want paper. We all need paper or whatever it is, right? Apples, oranges, whatever you like, right? People want more, right? So the way inflation works, and it's not inherently a bad thing always, right? It helps to, if policies are placed properly, um, it is, it helps grow the economy, right? So the way inflation works is, what's happening here is there is a higher demand than the supply that's being pushed out, right? So how do we fix this? We fix this by factories increasing their cost of production will increase, because what they're doing is they're trying to create more product to meet the demand. Um, right? Our demand is 3 pieces of paper in this example, right? So When this happens, right, we have an equal push and pull, right? Our demand is meeting um our supply, right? But the problem with this is our prices are going up because increased productions, right? So everything is going to cost more because production is being increased. So we're meeting the demand, but everything's still really high. So what factories do, or it doesn't necessarily be factories, it can be any industry, right? What they do is they create jobs. And those jobs allow us people to afford to continue meeting the supply that is being pushed off to us, right? So what stagflation is essentially is our production costs are increasing, our demand is not changing, right? So increase in demand is a growing economy, right? So our demand is not changing. Our supply is just getting more expensive, but we're not having enough jobs to meet the supply that's being pushed out to us. And that's essentially what stagflation is. Um, in an ideal world, as you've seen in this right side drawing here initially, right? So factories are putting out more product. People are meeting that by with their demand, right? The factories are meeting the demand. They're creating jobs so that way we can continue to meet the demand. And then, when things grow, then now we need to produce more and there's a bigger demand, right? But it stops when there aren't jobs able when there aren't enough jobs for people to put that money into buying those things, right? So that's where stagflation concerns are, right? The way inflation works is your supply is just going to keep is smaller than the demand, which we just need to increase by creating more job opportunities and allowing the economy to grow. When we're sitting where we are now, where our supply is costing more, we're not having enough jobs, and we're still having a high demand because our previous week's news essentially showed that people are still willing to spend the money. The problem is people don't have the money to spend because they're the unemployment rates were somewhat better, right? But the new job opportunities wasn't enough to balance that out. So essentially, what's happening, if anybody here has been on a look for a job or someone that's looking for a job, companies are just doing part-time jobs. There's no full-time jobs. There's nothing like that happening, right? So where we at right now is we're struggling to be able to buy products. Our demand is still there, but we aren't able to meet our own demands, right? So one thing I just wanted to point out here was just how our energy sector is growing here, and we have a new president that's coming out soon, right? So what we can do is hope that there are going to be more policy changes taking place, whether it's good or bad. It doesn't matter if you support or do not support, but it's just really good to stay involved, especially when you see how the news affects the market here. Day-to-day people just feel the backlash of the stagflation or inflation happening, but we have the benefit of seeing how it's when it's happening, right, and how it's affecting the overall market. So just wanted to point it out because our inauguration here is coming out on the 20th. So you know be more involved as possible as you can with your government, because you do want policies in place to help us create better job opportunities to lessen the cost of production so that we can have kind of a balance here and have a growing economy. So just wanted to kind of point out there a little lesson here in inflation and stagflation and how it works. Um, Last thing before we run away is our socks. Our socks was kind of doing the same thing as SMH. Breakout retest here. When we had the retest, we did have a gap up over 227 was insanely bullish for Nvidia, as we seen before we had the pullback here. Anything under 222.16, especially 210, is not super bullish for our semiconductors. So we do want to see if we don't break under 210 here for our Nvidia and AMD and all our semiconductors, right? As well as our news here. One thing with the news here, right, is people want people want stuff, but we can't afford that, right? So, and it's continuing to happen. So we can see that here with the real estate market here. We had a huge gap up, and it's filling the gap here that we had towards the beginning of July. We had a huge gap up. Growing economy, everything was going up. Um, Things were booming. People had more money to spend. The Now we're in a part of the market where we're having a huge pullback here, and like I said, the job opportunities aren't balancing out with the cost of everything. So uh I our IYR is our real estate sector, so it's just interesting to see us have a pullback, just to go coincide with what we've seen news wise. All right. And then our final thing before I end the live is just our quick overview on the news, and see what we can identify. Feel free to drop your questions now in the chat. I'll go through them towards the end of this. So the only news we're really looking out for is our core PPI here. And as always, we're going to break it down by positive and negatives. Positive meaning it's higher than average, and lower, negative means it's lower, right? Than the forecast. So for our CPI, positive, it's going to be good for our TLTs, our our TLTs and SPY and QQQ. So it's definitely, you're definitely gonna feel it, especially in QQQ. This is our consumer, our it basically measures how inflation is affecting us at a consumer level, right? So if it's not affecting as much, then people have more money to invest into things, right? So which is our risk on aspect of the market. And QQQ relies heavily on risk on assets, right? So we're going to see a nice move on QQQ if we do see some positivity here. And I don't know if James is here still, but he does play gold a lot. So one thing that you do want to look out for the news on here is if it is positive, our Dixie is going to go up, which is our dollar index. Um, so with Dixie going up, it just means that gold is gonna go down. They work primarily inverse of each other for the most part. When it comes to news related topics, it definitely plays out in this way. Um, as far as for the negatives, we're just gonna see the inverse of this, right? So SPY is gonna go down, QQQ will go down, or TLT will go down, and the inverse of this, so Dixie will go up, right? And the reason I point out these news, just to keep you prepared. If you look on our news last week for Tuesday, I believe it's Tuesday 8:30, Wednesday 8:30, and Tuesday 10 a.m., Wednesday 8:30, and Friday 8:30. Take a look at that 30-minute candle and tell me how it looks to you, right? It's just a huge red body candle that kind of just completely changed any pattern that's happening. So you do want to be very mindful of the news that's taking place, and that's where a lot of us will always say, "Be careful, there's news coming out," because it could go either way. It's just worth noting what news is going to be important and really what they do for their broad market. So the next thing we're gonna look at is our PPCPI or PPI here. PPI, similar things to the car PPI. We're just gonna have that just be the same thing. You can just scroll back in the video here and you'll see that it's the same aspects that's happening here. One one thing that is going to be also really huge is our retail and unemployment right here. With this section, this really where I'm interested in as far as our XLYs, which is your Teslas, your Amazons, and so on and so forth, right? So with any positive results, we're going to see our XLY go up, SPY will go down. Same thing with QQQ. Um, and the inverse of that would be our SPY is going up and our QQQ is going up. Um, and our gold will also be going up. So that's worth noting for that. As far as that, I think that's it really for the news. I would really be looking out for 9:30, 8:30 here, 8:30 again. If you want at the end of the live, I can also kind of post a screenshot of kind of what each of these things are more in depth because we're getting closer to the end of the live here. So I'll go ahead and take a screenshot just to kind of give you guys an idea of what those news are and what they mean. Before I end the live, any other questions that you guys may have? Hopefully, you learned something along the way. Any other questions? Oh, for any of you looking at NVIDIA, 134 is going to be your line in the sand. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Apparently. Well, as far as our big NVIDIA, because everyone is going to be interested in, I posted at the end of the video here. Any holds over 130, where's this? 136.58 is inherently bullish. Any break under 132.40 is inherently bearish. So just be on the lookout for those levels if you're playing NVIDIA at all. Not a problem, Ronnie. So I'm going to go ahead and end the recording here.